Alright, so in this video we're going to expand on blueprints by talking a little bit about variables. So I'm going to just show you another way to create a blueprint, and that's just by right-clicking down here in our blueprints folder and just going to blueprint class and going to actor here. Now remember, an actor is the smallest blueprint you can do. So if I drag out a cube or whatever, you'll see actor in the title. You can see here's an example, a static mesh actor of a cube mesh. So with that said, let's go ahead and just create an actor, and I'm just going to call this, I don't know, let's make a health pickup. Now I don't know if we'll get to it in this video because it might go a little bit long, but let's just see. So here I've dragged this blueprint into the scene. You can see there's nothing here. And maybe over here is where our health pickup will live. Now if I double click this here, it's another way of hitting this button here where you hit edit health pickup. And I can actually add components to this, just like we did with our door. So I'm going to go ahead and add a scene component. And what this does is, let's see if I can spell that correctly. There we go, this guy, utility scene. And if I drag this up, you can see it now got rid of that little white dot. And it gave me a little locator here for us to work with, right? So let's hit F on this to focus. And I'm going to go ahead and just add a component which is just going to be a sphere. And I think what might be cool is like I'll do some stuff in Blender or Maya. I really want to center this sphere to, there we go, that's good. Okay, so here's our scene root. Our sphere is a child of it. I'm going to scale our sphere down just a little bit here. Looks pretty good. Now, notice if I move this up, it moves up in our scene. Off to the left here, whether you're in the event graph view, construction view, or viewport, you can see there are these things called variables. Now, I'm going to compile and save this, and you'll see that it has now updated our object here to have a scene root and a sphere. This is the same sphere that is in here. And down here, you'll see that we're missing a section called default, right? And if I click on this health pickup blueprint self here, when I create a variable here, and let's call it player health, and the thing to understand is player health is a strongly typed language, which means Boolean here, if I go to integer, you have to define a data type for this. So I'm going to hit compile and save, and what that allows me to do is say, okay, my player health is 100, and I press enter. I'm going to compile this. But let's say I wanted to see that, if I was a designer or something and not really a programmer, I wanted to see that update in the scene as I was like building out my designs. Well, if you click this I here, it'll make the variable public. So if I hit compile now, notice over here a default section appeared, and the value of player health, which is 100, now appears in the viewport, and I can edit this value here. Now, as you probably noticed, I changed it to an integer, which is a whole number value, but you can do a float, a vector, any one of these. And if you're still kind of learning about what data types are, like what all this stuff does, don't worry. Hopefully with time I'll be able to go through many of these, if not most of them, depending on how we're going to use them in this game we're building. Another thing I want you to notice is if you are coming from a programming background, if you click over here, you can see we can create an array, a set, a map, and so forth by just clicking this little tick here, this tick mark here. And that'll let us change it to a different type of data structure. All right, so let's go to our event graph here, and let me just delete. Let's get rid of event tick, and we'll delete that, and we'll just look at event begin play for a second. A couple other things to notice inside of here, inside of our event graph. Now, this is where we can do some visual programming. These white pins are called execution pins. So if I drag this off and I just type the word branch, we can do a if statement, like if this is true, do this, if this is false, do that, with some sort of condition, right? And then we could set that branch based on a condition. So if this is checked on or off. Now, these color things here are called data pins. So I can drag this out and I can grab a variable. So if I wanted to create a variable to edit in my scene to adjust this condition, I can do that. Now we created something similar like this in the previous video where we had it tick on and we printed something to the screen, but for now I'm just sort of going over vocabulary really quickly. We can also do arithmetic. So if I hit a plus in here, you're going to see float plus vector, integer, all this stuff, and you can see it creates these different types of addition. Like if we're adding a vector value to an integer, and we'll get all that other stuff. We can also do an integer plus an integer. If I right click here, add a plus sign, and I could just do, let's see here, integer plus integer is what I'm talking about. I can also do multiplication. Don't worry too much about that. Just understand that you can do it. When we get into normalizing things or moving things around, we're going to be doing a little bit of that math. Just some other things. There are logic operators like or, let's see, and not. And as I mentioned, you don't worry too much if you don't know what any of this stuff means just yet. Just follow along so that you can just kind of practice creating these nodes and understanding that they do exist. So these are ways of checking different types of code and distinction. So I want to do this or this, depending on how I want to do it. I want to do this or this and this, or I want to do something but not something else. And this is like, so say another way of looking at this is like, both of these values have to be correct for something to happen, for some sort of value to be marked as true, or some condition if we're branching off. And we're going to get to all that stuff later. And the last thing I'm going to go over before we get into, and we'll do this in the next video, of actually maybe coding the pickup. We'll look at what we want to do next, but you'll see these things over here where we have macros and functions. What I want you to just kind of, in a generic sense, think about is a function is a reusable block of code. So it's a way of taking a whole grouping of code, embedding it in a function, and pulling it out later so we could reuse it in different, across our event graph. Another way of doing it is there's these things called macros, which are a little bit more complicated than functions, not in their not in the understanding, but sometimes you'll have a huge you'll have a system in place where you have like enemies, zombie enemies spawning or whatever, and you'd embed that in a macro, and then you can pull that macro out where you need it in your event graph. I think that's it for now. In the next video, we're going to get into more implementation and less vocabulary. I'm not a huge fan of doing the vocab stuff. That's why I kind of ran through it.